Dandy. So whenever you're ready, Kathryn, you just start your story.
Okay, my name is Kathryn Masters, and my father was Hugh Harrison, who was on course 27 at Falcon Field. And I didn't know anything about Falcon Field until about 3 years ago. And all the time as I grew up as a child, my father always had this car sticker in his car, which said, "I learned to fly at Falcon Field." And I just thought it was an airfield somewhere that he had learned to fly, because he was an RAF pilot. He had stayed in the RAF until he retired in 1981. And I never thought anything about it. And it was only about 3 years ago, and I Googled Falcon Field, and I thought, it's in Arizona. What on earth was he doing in Arizona learning to fly? So from there, it kind of grew and snowballed. The more I found out about it, the more I found out that there were these 7 British Forces, British flying training schools out there. And so I started to try and find a bit more about it. We were then going out to America on a trip, and we were going to some of the places that we'd already been before, because we were taking Neil's son, and he was selecting where he wanted to go. And I said, well, we're going to go quite near to Falcon Field. Do you think we should go and have a look and see what it's like? So we booked that into our itinerary, and we went there. I contacted Deanne Harris at the airport. I contacted the Wings of Flight Foundation. Neil booked me a flight on the Stearman that my dad would have flown. And we went out there, and we thought we'd probably spend about an hour there or so. And of course, when we got there, they were delighted that somebody had come from England to see them, and they kept fetching people to come and see us. They told us about Kelly Sallaway's Patriot Skies documentary that was, in the process of being made, and all sorts of stories. And we ended up spending the whole day there. And then I think I kind of got hooked, and I think this kind of happens to people a lot. People that I've spoken to have said the same sort of thing, that once they start to find stuff out about Falcon Field, they want to know more and more. And I bought Jim Dawson's book about the RAF there. And this was in November of 2018. And when we came home, 3 months later, I don't know why, I pulled a box of my dad's stuff out from under the spare bed, and I started going through it. Now, he had been dead for maybe 18 years at that point. So why 3 months after that I decided to do it, I don't know. And in there I found his membership list for the Falcon Field Association. And I thought, this is quite interesting. So I started looking through, and I found there were other people that were on course 27. So I wonder if any of them are still alive, because I didn't know what he had done when he was out there. I had no idea what happened. I'd read the book that had been written about it. I'd been out there, but I didn't know what my father had done. So I thought, I wonder if I could contact any of them. So I wrote a letter to everyone that was on course 27. I mean, bearing in mind this membership list was probably 15, 20 years old. And I started to get some replies. I think I sent out about 60 letters to the first time. And then when I started to get some replies, I thought, maybe I'll do course 26 as well, just in case. Because when I thought about it, it was a very short period, wasn't it? 1941 to 45. I thought, well, they're all going to be in their 90s. I was thinking originally that course 27 would be the youngest, but they would only have been the youngest by 4 or 5 years. So I thought I might as well write some more. So I wrote to course 26. That was another 40 letters. And then the letter that I was sending out, I explained who I was and why I was trying to find out more about my father's time out there, and I knew they'd been a pilot and so on. Put in all my contact details, my address, my phone number, my email address, and I started to get replies. My email inbox lit up like Christmas, and the phone was going all the time. I had to get myself a foolscap book, and every time the phone rang, I wrote down who it was and started making notes about what they were saying, because they were telling me so much about it. And then I thought, well, having gone this far, why don't I just finish it? For all the ones that are in the UK, why don't I just do the rest of them? So I did all of the courses. So that was about 400 letters by the time I'd finished. And I've ended up with 19 pilots at that time, I think 37 widows, and about 65 families, so sort of sons and daughters and grandchildren of pilots. And I have all of them now on my mailing list. So, and some of them are ringing me, some of them are FaceTiming me, some are Zooming. It was just, it became, during lockdown, it was a fantastic project to have going because it was all, absorbing while I was doing it. So after that point, then I found...
What's that? Sorry.
Oh, sorry?
Just
Oh,
the motorcycle.
motorbike.
Okay, he's about to leave. Just leaving the gate now.
So we'll pick it up from Kathryn about the lockdown. Pick it up from the lockdown portion.
Yes.
We're ready now? Yeah.
Yep, go for it.
Okay, go.
Yes, so I'd got quite a project to do during lockdown. It really kept me busy because it was very absorbing, and I really enjoyed doing
Hold
it.
on a minute. Sorry, Kathryn. Is he gone now? No, he's gone now.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Let's start it again.
Is that enough
Sorry.
just to say that bit?
Yes.
Yeah,
no,
so
start
just
that
about
bit again.
the lockdown. So while the lockdown was going on, and we couldn't go anywhere, I was getting all these letters. Every day I was getting lots of letters, I was getting emails, the phone was ringing, and it kept me very busy because it really absorbed me. So it was a great thing to do at that time, and probably if it had come at any other time, I probably wouldn't have had time to do it. Then the Wings of Flight Foundation had got their 80th anniversary of the opening of Falcon Field. And I was talking to Jocelyn Condon there, and she was telling me about the event that they were going to have. And they were going to be inviting all these people. And I said, well, I've got all these contacts here now. And they started doing the same thing in America, sort of contacting all the American pilots and getting all of those on their list out there as well. So we were gathering quite a number of them together. She sent me out the invites for that she was sending out, sent me a box of those, and I sent them out to all of mine over here. So we'd got all of that going on. We decided we'd try and get some of the people together here in England before we went out, and then hopefully we would all be able to go out to Arizona, or not all of us, but a representative group. We had the RAF Director of Flying Training was going to go out to be there. And then, of course, COVID just continued and everything's just been shut down to an extent that we thought we weren't going to be able to go at all. It is now beginning to look like some of us may be able to go out there, but it wasn't going to be the experience that we'd hoped for. So the other thing is that meanwhile, I've been, people have been writing to me. They've also been scanning their photos and sending them to me. And writing stories to me, writing letters, sending emails and telling me things on the phone. And I came across a woman called Anne Hughes, who was a volunteer at the Imperial War Museum. And she had a strange story because a friend of hers had given her a scrapbook that they'd found at a car boot sale. And it was about number 5 BFTS. And they'd said, you might want to do something about this because you're interested in aircraft and all of that sort of stuff. So she had gone to speak to Emily Charles, who's the website editor at the Imperial War Museum, and said, could I put this on the website? So she got just like a microsite for them. So I went down to the Imperial War Museum, which also hosts the American Air Museum website, and said, could we have a microsite for BFTS? So we now have that, and as people have been sending me in their photos and documents and whatever else they've had, their stories, I've been putting them all up on the website. So we've now got a lot of the information recorded up there. Not all of it, but it's a start. And anyone can put information on there. It doesn't have to be me, although I've done it so far. Anyone can add to it that wants to. So that was another thing that I'd been doing. And then I started writing newsletters because there used to be a newsletter written by the Falcon Field Association I suppose. Maybe it was the secretary who wrote it, I'm not actually sure. But one of the officers used to write this newsletter, and that used to go around. And I thought, well, it would be nice to sort of do something similar, but with the stuff that was being sent to me. So I was starting to, do that and send that out. So I've been sending out a newsletter every month or two with the photos that have been coming in and some of the stories that have been coming in and things that are happening over in Arizona, things that are happening over here. The other thing that I found after I'd found the list, the membership list, and was able to write to all the pilots and try and find them, I also found a box of letters from my father to his mother while he was at Falcon Field. Now, I didn't know anything about Falcon Field before this. I'd never spoken to my father about it. He never really talked about anything about being in the Air Force. He never talked about the things that he'd done. And I certainly didn't know anything about his training out there. So finding these letters for me was an absolute treasure, because I could read, he was writing to his mother every week and telling her exactly, what was going on, what was happening to the cadets, what training he was doing, where they went on their days off, what they did, what their days were like, how hot it was, and all that kind of thing. So for me, that's all that I know about his time out there. I know he has a photograph album, but I haven't been able to find it. Nobody in the family seems to know where it is, but we know that there is one. It's on his list of, these are my photo albums, and there's one that says 1940s Arizona, but we haven't found it yet. So these letters have become my only knowledge of what he did. So for me to try and contact other pilots, it was about trying to find out what my dad had experienced out there, what had happened to him, what it had been like. Because it seemed an extraordinary thing to me that, these 18-year-olds were just going across to America and learning to fly. He was born in Lincoln, and he went to school there, and then he went to Cambridge University, and he was studying aeronautical engineering, and he joined the University Air Squadron. So he was obviously interested in flying from a very early age. But then he left university to volunteer to join the RAF in the war. And then after, I think it was about 6 months training in the UK, they went across on liners to New York, and then a 5-day trip on the train down to Falcon Field, and then it all started from there. And so that is my entire knowledge of what he's been doing.
Any of his trips, Kathryn, do you remember what he particularly said about any of his trips? Any of his outings or anything anywhere?
He talked about, when they were in New York, he talked about being able to go out to any show they wanted. They didn't have to pay. And he talked about, they didn't get up until 11 o'clock on those days because the shows didn't start until midnight, and so they wouldn't get back again till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So I think they were having a sort of high old time. He also talked about at the end, when he was coming home, how I think that was quite a surprise. It was quite a shock, and it was quite sudden that they were all being sent home, and they had to decide whether to stay in the Air Force or not. And he did decide to stay, and I don't think there were very many of them that did. I get the impression there's probably only about a dozen that stayed for a full RAF career after the war, out of the thousands of cadets that trained there. But at the end, they were given, they were treated wonderfully by the Americans, and they were given lots of parties, and they were lent lots of daughters to go out dancing with and that kind of thing. And on his final weekend, in his letters, he talks about a hayride where they actually went out about 30 of them went in a wagon. They went in cars to a wagon that was full of hay. They all jumped onto this wagon, and then they were taken right out into I don't know, the middle of nowhere, where they'd got a big fire burning and they were making them hamburgers and what have you. And they all sang round the fire, and then back on the hay wagon, and then back in the cars and back to camp. So they had a pretty amazing time. I think that was one of the things I've noticed most about talking to the pilots, is that they said it was the best time of their life. Although for many of them, and well, for all of them to an extent, they were expecting to come back to fight in the war. They'd gone out there to learn to fly because, you know, the sun shone out there and they weren't being bombed. They couldn't learn to fly in England, so they went out there. So I think all of them had a pretty amazing time. So although they were planning to come back to fight for their country, I think they all had a pretty amazing time while they were out there, and they all say it's the time of their life. They were young men in the sun, and all they had to do was fly all day. They had a great time.
In any of his letters, did he mention anything about food?
Yes, he did, because of course in England at the time there were rations, and they couldn't quite believe it. You know, right from the day that they docked in New York, they were being met with, you know, candy and donuts and goodness knows what else. And then, yes, they could have, you know, breakfast with eggs and bacon, and it couldn't quite be, and every day, not one egg a week as they'd have had on, you know, on their rations at home. So I think it was quite astonishing the way that the change in the culture that they found out there. It was very different from what they'd had at home.
Did he have a particular family that was assigned to him? Or was it just a general friendliness?
He did go to. I think they seemed to have a choice. If they wanted to, they could go to a particular family, and I think he did do that sometimes. He did talk about some family that he went to, and also he talked about a mayor that he twice that he went to that house with one of the other cadets. They used to go there and have a great time. I think it might have been the hayride that was organised from there, actually. So yeah, I think there were a lot of people that just looked after them at the weekends, or they could stay on the camp if they preferred to, or stay in Phoenix or whatever.
Did he ever go to Los Angeles or Hollywood?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
And then
I know quite a lot of them did, but I don't want to confuse other people's memories with what I've read in his letters. But I don't think he mentioned particularly going to Hollywood or LA, no.
And was there any mention of the swimming pool?
Yes. I mean, he said they used to go into the pool 3 or 4 times a day. So they'd just go and dip in it and then come back, because he said they had breaks during their training. They had breaks every 20 minutes because it was so hot. They were either going to sleep or fainting or whatever. So they just used to go and drop in the pool and then come back out again. And the day used to finish at 3. He said that Ravalli was at 5:45, and then they started flying at 6, and then they had ground instruction. And then at 3 o'clock their working day finished because it was just too hot to carry on. So they had three or four dips during that time in the pool, and then at 3 o'clock everybody in the pool just to get cooled off. It was so hot.
And then what about any particular flying memories that your dad shared? Do you recall any of those?
I can remember in the letters he mentioned some cadets who got lost when they were on cross country and landed in Mexico and were interned there, and then had to be fetched back by the CO. There were other cadets who had gone solo and then crashed or gone into a spin, or had to crash land and then have to walk back 5 miles or something like that. So there was quite a lot of it was a lot of responsibility. I was astonished that they were going solo after only 7 hours of flying. I couldn't quite take that in. That seemed astonishing to me. And so I don't think it was surprising that some of them came adrift, either got lost, or because there was nothing really to steer by. It was just a lot of desert and cacti. There wasn't really much else to look at, was there? Landmarks on the ground. The other thing that I was particularly struck by in his letters was when he mentioned the hurricane. There was a hurricane on the 1st of August when he was there. And I know I've read about it in Jim Dawson's book, and I've heard about it from other people. I didn't realise until I read his letters he was actually there when it was happening, and he was one of the cadets that was involved. Would you like me to just read a little extract from it? This is him writing to Mum and Pop and all. He had 2 sisters as well, and so I guess he's writing to all of them. A lot has happened since I last wrote to you. A week ago today we had a terrific thunderstorm. The rain was literally in sheets, and we got 3 inches of rain inside an hour, and that also meant that the billets were flooded out. Everything was wet through, including the beds. The rivers overflowed. The airfield was US. And so on the Wednesday afternoon, we were allowed to go up dual only and using the runways. The sand was absolutely useless. Then on Wednesday evening, it started to pour again. It started with a common dust storm and a terrifically high wind, and then rain came and thunder and lightning. You never saw anything like it. The PTs, that's the steermans, I think, isn't it, were whipping all around the field, about 100 feet up in the air with no pilots in them. It was a fantastic sight. I thought I was dreaming. Lots of cadets ran out to try and help the ground crew to stop the planes from getting away. They were fastened down in the first place, but the wind tore the mooring ropes up. PTs chased the men along the airfield. Some lay down and the PTs rolled over their stomachs and they were carted off to hospital. 10 people were hanging on to an AT Texan when it was struck by lightning, and 10 people got the shock of their lives. One of them was horribly burned all down his left side, and he was taken away screaming. An AT chased the chief mechanic across the tarmac, and he fell down in front of it, cut his legs, but luckily the plane missed him. We were all out there in our swimming trunks, and the hail nearly killed us. The wind speed got up to 85, and we found it difficult to stand up at all, never mind work. Anyway, the planes ended up in 2 groups, 1 a heap on the tarmac, and 2 littered in the local orange grove. Number 6, my kite, was in group 2. I'll send a picture of the wreckage, particularly number 6. It was the worst hit. The owner of the orange grove is well known here because he's always complaining about our kites warming up near his grove and blowing sand all over it and spoiling the crop. I bet he never cursed so much in all his life as he did that night. Only 2 planes were still alive next morning, so we were unable to fly again on Thursday and Friday. On Saturday, 40 new ones were flown in by American lieutenants, but they're PL-13Ds instead of the old PL-17A, and have red wingtips and bands round the fuselage like a flying circus. So I was really, as I'd heard about the hurricane, but that really brought it to life. I hadn't realised how many people were injured, how dangerous it was, and the thought of all these planes literally just on ropes 100 feet up in the air, it must have been very dangerous. And obviously they all went out and tried to save their planes, but couldn't. And there's a picture of his number 6 in Jim Dawson's book, you know, with it wrecked, it was the one. I didn't realise, it was the one that got the worst damage apparently, and I didn't realise they flew the same plane all the time. So when he said that, you know, number 6 was his kite, and I thought, well, you know, surely you don't always fly one, you just, you know, you go out and you take whichever. But they didn't. They had one that was, you know, the one that they always flew. So I found that quite interesting as well. And quite a sort of a graphic account of how many people must have been injured very badly that night. And what the weather was like, goodness me. You know, it's not what we would have expected in England, and quite an experience for them, I think.
See, okay, what?
No.
Do you have any thoughts?
I was just going to be the message, but I think save that for last. The message.
Oh, yes. So, can you think of it? See, Kathryn, you knew a lot more than you thought you knew.
I did actually. When you said things came into my mind, and I thought I didn't know. I couldn't remember.
Did your father remain friends with a lot of the people that he met at Falcon Field?
I don't think he can have done, because I wasn't ever aware that he went to the reunions. Although he had this in every car. You know, as he changed his car, the sticker moved. So it clearly mattered a lot to him, didn't it? He had the membership list, and he obviously sent his, as his address changed, as his houses changed, he'd send his updated address because, it had changed in there. So he was obviously keeping up to date with them. I remember before he died, he said, when you're doing my funeral list, I mean, we knew he'd only got a few months. So he said, when you're inviting people to my funeral, make sure that you let the Falcon Field Association know. And actually 2 of them came to his funeral with loads of photographs and talked about his time there, which was wonderful. I wish I could remember more about it. I was too upset at the time, really, to be able to take much notice. I just thought it was him learning to fly, because I've been the daughter of an RAF pilot all my life, and we was posted to different places. We went all the way around the world, and he was just flying different planes wherever we went, and I just didn't really think anything of it. He was either flying or he was instructing, or he actually led the Central Flying School aerobatic team in the 1950s, which became the Red Arrows later, and he was leading that aerobatic team. But I didn't know anything about that at the time. I knew nothing about anything. Obviously I'd see him in his uniform, I knew he was in the RAF, but I knew he flew, and I knew he flew lots of different planes, but I didn't know a great deal. He just didn't talk about it. It's really lovely to hear the pilots now talking about their time there. And perhaps they feel like they talk about it more easily, maybe because it was such a different part of their lives. And then after that, they went back to their civilian jobs. And my father stayed in the Air Force, and perhaps it was different for him. I don't know. He just never talked about any of it to me. So unless I'd found his letters, I wouldn't have known anything. And it was only finding all of that made me reach out to these other people. And then suddenly we've got a little group, haven't we? A little community. And of course Kelly's making her documentary. You're going around, talking to people and filming them. It's just, this is like the icing on the cake now. I just feel now that it's a really important part of social history for both England and America. And I think it's a really important part of the RAF history as well. And I just want to feel that it's now recorded and remembered. And I think that's where we are. I think that's where we are now. So that's what you're doing, isn't it? You're going around doing it.
So if that for some reason you're not able to make the reunion, what would your message be to the people?
Oh, that's a hard one. You shouldn't have just thrown that one on me. What would I say? I would say that what I've just said. I think that we need to remember and record these men. They were extraordinary men. I mean, not all of them survived their training, and a great many of them came back happily to fight for their country and didn't come back. And I think they were a remarkable group of young men. When you think how young they were just teenagers. And yet they were prepared to go through all of that. I doubt if many of them had been abroad before, and yet they were crossing the Atlantic on a liner. They were taking these great long train journey and then learning to fly in no time at all, a matter of months, and then doing the reverse trip to come back. So I think that we should just remember them for the remarkable people that they were. That would be my message to them.
Perfect. Anything we've forgotten, Vince?
No? Was that the only reading that you wanted to do? Was there any other?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, unless you want...
Did you want to go through and see if there was anything else you wanted to add, Kathryn? In the stuff you'd marked on your way down?
I don't think so. I think the only other bit that I found interesting I found all of it interesting because he was my father. The only other bit was, I think, when he actually left... when they had to leave suddenly at the end, and I should get a new folder.
It's very descriptive, the end.
Yes, when he didn't know whether to stay in or not. I don't know where it is now. this one. This was the 4th of September, and this would have been 1945. Dear Mum, the school closes on September the 11th. Flying stops on the 8th as we leave on the 10th for New York. Why? It looks as though we're on the way home. The only hope of getting trained now is to sign on in England for 5 years or so. I'm really in a fix to know what to do now. I don't want to stay in the RAF if I don't get my wings with at least the chance of a commission. So should I sign on and risk getting through advanced, or get demobbed with the others and get trained for a civvy job? I've qualified for B&A pilot's licenses now, so I could teach people to fly. The trouble is getting a plane to start. Our week's leave was cancelled and we went straight from primary onto basic on the Harvards. I got through the exams okay.
Okay, sorry. It's too much noise.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
They're shouting
Shouting,
and
are they?
talking to each other.
That's all right.
Did you want to deal with his career further on?
Could you just get me, I brought that framed thing. It's in that bag. I'll just show that. We don't need to do a great deal about it, but just to show where he ended up, really, I suppose. Okay.
Exchanging babies right now.
Exchanging babies. Really? Okay. Shout to them to hush.
So, Vince, do we need to start from the top with the letter?
No. It just got a bit loud there at the end, but I think for the most part,
You got the gist of it.
yeah, she was overpowering what was going on in the background, so it's right.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't think there was any.
Do you want to read the back page of it?
No, I think it's
What's the back
fine.
page?
To be honest, I think that it went on into the bit about the hayride, which I've already
did
told
it?
you about,
Oh,
so I
okay.
don't think we need that, do we, again?
What do you think?
I think if you'd got the beginning of it, where I think it was the fact that he
We can
was
close it way down, we can probably finish it up.
tortured a bit by what to do. I think that was, I had no idea that he wasn't sure whether he was, I just assumed he'd gone into the RAF. I didn't know how he got into the RAF at all in the first place. But this, when I went out to Falcon Field, when I knew I was going out there, I thought I would just do sort of a small summary of his life, really, just to take with me, because I thought they might like to know what had become of someone who trained at Falcon Field. And so I did, this is exactly the same as I took out for them. So I'd put on the top, obviously, the car sticker that had started, 3 years ago, set me off. This is him with his crew when he was leading the aerobatic team at the Central Flying School. They're flying Meteors. This was him with his mother and my mother when he was being presented with his Air Force Cross at Buckingham Palace. And this was him at his last posting at RAF Newton when he was station commander there. And then I just put a bit about all the different planes that he'd flown, because I thought perhaps people that go to Falcon Field probably interested in planes. So I just wrote what he'd done there. So from learning to fly as a teenager there, this was what came of it. So quite a nice career, I think.
It's very
That was
good.
a nice ending.
Very good, yes.
That was nice.
Yeah, perfect.
Alright.
Good.
Is there any, so there's nothing else you feel you would like to share, Kathryn?
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
I have. Apart from my story about finding out about Falcon Field and his letters, that's really all I've got.
Perfect. Perfect. We're good.